Spectralism is a term that was first used in 1979, and since then it's been used to describe a variety of different composers. But what they all have in common is an interest in composing with overtones. Just to clarify the idea of overtones, here's a single note played by a clarinet. And here you can see all of the frequencies within that note. The lowest frequency is referred to as the fundamental, and then the higher frequencies are referred to as the overtones. And taken together, these are referred to as the spectrum, which is obviously where spectralism gets its name from. Now, another thing that's worth clarifying is the relationship between spectrum and timbre. And this is because one of the things that determines the unique tone colour of an instrument is the overtones that it produces. So for example, here you can see the same note played by two instruments. First of all, a trumpet, and then by a flute. Hopefully you should be able to see and hear the difference here. So the trumpet has a very full spectrum with lots of very high overtones, and this is what gives it its rich and bright sound. Whereas the flute has a far more sparse spectrum with far fewer high frequency overtones, and this is what makes it sound more pure and far less bright. The reason this is important is because I think one of the characteristic features of spectralism is a blurring of the distinction between harmony and timbre. A really good example of this can be seen in Gérard Grisey's 1975 work Partials, which opens with a single low E played by a trombone. The spectrum of this single note is then arranged for the rest of the ensemble. The composer Julian Anderson said about this opening, "The resultant object is much more than just a chord. It is a timbre, or it is a sonority which is ambiguously somewhere between harmony and timbre." The important thing to remember here is that what Grisey's trying to do isn't synthesis. He's not trying to emulate or recreate the sound of a trombone. And that's because each of the instruments in the ensemble has their own spectrum as well. So it's not just an identical recreation of the original trombone sound. Really what Grisey is doing is creating a kind of intensified, almost hyper-real version of the original sound object. A similar example to this can be seen in Tristan Murial's work, Le Courant de l'Espace. However, in this case, rather than using an acoustic sound source, such as the trombone used by Grisey, Murial chooses instead to use an electronic instrument, in this case the on martineau. In this next excerpt, the on martineau engages in a kind of call and response with the ensemble. The on martineau begins by playing a pure sine wave, which is then imitated by the strings playing harmonics. The signal from the on martineau is then sent through a ring modulator, which adds sum and difference tones to the pure sound wave, and so creating a more complex spectrum. The frequencies of this more complex spectrum are then played by the ensemble. Another characteristic feature of spectralism is the use of extended techniques in order to create distinct spectral changes in the sound of an instrument. A really good example of this can be seen in Kaija Saariaho's work, Sept Papillons for solo cello. In this excerpt, Saariaho asks the cellist to play sul ponticello, that's with the bow right up against the bridge, and the effect that this has is to amplify the overtones of the sound, and so creating a kind of spectral harmony. And so once again, we see this blurring of the distinction between timbre and harmony. Another characteristic feature of spectralism is the use of microtones, that is, intervals smaller than a semitone. And this is something that a number of spectralist composers have found necessary in order to accurately notate overtones. So for example, if we look at this harmonic series on C, we can see that a number of the overtones are significantly out of tune with equal temperament. The 7th harmonic is almost exactly a third of a semitone flat, and the 11th harmonic is almost exactly half a semitone flat. So in order to accurately notate these overtones, a number of composers have introduced extra accidentals, including those which specify quarter tones and sixth tones. And the use of these can be seen in the following excerpt, which is from Georg Friedrich Haas's second string quartet. This begins with the cello playing a low C, which, like the Saariaho, it begins to play closer to the bridge in order to bring out its overtones. These overtones are then imitated and sustained by the viola and the 2 violins. Haas even goes so far as to number each of these overtones in order to show exactly how they should harmonically relate to the cello's low C fundamental. One of the things I find particularly interesting about this is its connection to musical history. The idea of basing harmony on overtones in of itself isn't anything particularly new. From the use of perfect fifths in medieval organum through to the establishment of the triad, it seems that what Haas and a number of spectralist composers are doing is simply taking harmony to its next logical step and moving further up the harmonic series. So these are just 4 examples, but hopefully they've given you a useful introduction to the idea of spectralism. There are a load of composers out there who have either been described as spectralist or have been influenced by spectralism, whose music I'd highly recommend, including Jonathan Harvey, Claude Vivier, Anna Maria Avram, Emily Hall, and Julian Anderson. And I will make sure to add some links in the description below.